In this presentation, we'll be talking about social justice in education. So what exactly is social justice in education? Well, there's three main ways to go about this. You have the teacher's perspective, in which the teacher reflects on their personal history and backgrounds and confront biases that are brought in from the classroom from their personal experiences. You have the student's perspective, in which students participate in lessons and classes that strengthen their knowledge of social justice and inspire them to make changes in the world. And also, on the teacher's behalf, recognizing what are implicit biases that you may walk into the classroom with. Social justice in the classroom is important to teach for the following reasons. Students live these issues on a daily basis. As educators, we should respect and include that in our lessons. Students should see their classrooms as places of hope and learn skills to make the ideal society a reality. Ultimately, every day, students are living where they believe they are not treated equally in society and that they're judged already based on what societal norms are. In the classroom, we have to create an atmosphere that is inclusive to make sure that every student believes they have a chance to be successful. So what does that look like? A classroom where classmates are seen as co-learners rather than adversaries. The classroom should be non-competitive. Lessons should be focused on questions of inequality, issues that affect students, and include materials that focus on diverse backgrounds. This is all the more important in situations where students may not come from diverse backgrounds. For example, you may have students who live in an all-white community and may be unknowingly insensitive to materials about an African American topic, such as slavery. You have to be able to make sure those students are aware of what is appropriate and what is inappropriate when talking in those contexts because they have lacked that diverse background. But that's nothing to shun them for. As educators, we have to make sure that our students learn how to appropriately respond and create that atmosphere of social justice. Bias in the classroom. Bias in the classroom can take many forms. Here are some examples. Thinking a certain student may know to ask for help when they are struggling. So assuming that a student knows when to ask for help when in fact they may not because they have been shunned by teachers in the past. Assuming that students from certain background or ethnicity have different intellectual abilities than others. A good example of this is the stereotype that Asians are really good with math. So you may not want to approach them or see them as you would see them as the expert in math rather than a student of a different ethnicity. Treating a student with a physical disability as a student who also has an intellectual disability. A physical disability does not necessarily impair a mental ability from a student. However, there is an implicit bias that sometimes teachers make based on that. Students associated with an identity are experts in the field: race, sexual orientation, disability, etc. Everybody can experience bias in the classroom, from the teachers to the students themselves. Because the teacher sees a student as someone who matches what they are, then they may turn to them more so to answer questions and volunteer them for tasks in the classroom rather than a student who does not match that particular teacher's ethnicity. As humans, we naturally go with people who match who we are as individuals. We find our tribe, as it is. So when someone doesn't match what we initially perceive them as, we tend to shy away from them until we know them on a different basis. Solutions to bias in the classroom from Jordan McGarrer's experience. Take a step back and take a look at every student. Get to know every student and take a look at their dreams and aspirations for their future. Recognize each student's skills and weaknesses. Walk around and look at every student's work and offer help so they don't feel as if they have to ask. When you feel like you may be being biased in your lesson, take a day and teach it from a different perspective. Recognizing implicit biases. So implicit bias are the unconscious racial or socioeconomic bias towards students, which can be as frequent as explicit bias. So you may be unaware of your actions that may come off as biased, but socioeconomic statuses, so if a student is poor, you may make judgments upon them and their performance, thinking they may not value their education, they won't amount to anything. So those perceptions, those preconceived notions that we have of a student's performance based on those unconscious beliefs will actually impede their academic progress in the classroom. Because we believe it to be so, we make it so. Even if we think we are above making judgments on our students, our subconscious brain is always at work making perceived judgments based on a student's appearance. How do you identify your biases? There is a self-assessment in the additional resources that has been put together by Harvard University that lets you know if you are more biased one way or another. You can also be aged biased is another example, racially biased, more sexist biased, so leaning more towards favoring females or males. You can seek to create an inclusive classroom, as stated in previous slides. Ask for feedback. This can either be from a colleague or from students in the form of observations and evaluations. So when you give your students midterm evaluations, they can judge and gauge how much they feel you included them in the lesson. Tips to integrate social justice in your school. Utilize materials that are drawn from diverse sources. Be sure not to emphasize one race or social group when selecting class resources. Incorporate projects that have students working on real-world issues and, if possible, include some type of service or social action. Make sure that your social justice lessons are relevant to content. Show students how what they are learning is and can be used in the real world. Remember, you want your students to take what they learn in your classroom and make a difference in the world and create that change. Additional readings and resources. The implicit bias test is right there. The first one. Lesson plans that emphasize social justice from the National Education Association. Further resources for math-focused social justice lesson plans. For math teachers, a textbook put together by Loyola University Chicago. And an equality practice space is the last resource. These are the resources we used for this presentation.